If someone had told me 18 months ago that I would be sitting across from the most feared woman in our world, watching her trace the back of my hand with her fingertip like it was the most precious thing she had ever been allowed to touch, I would have laughed until I cried. Because I was nobody. A records clerk. Rank 6 Omega in a building full of alphas who didn't know my name and didn't particularly want to. And she was Queen Vailindra of the Conclave, the woman they called the Untouchable. Not a title, a literal fact. For 3 years, anyone who made skin contact with her screamed. Not metaphorically. Screamed. And pulled away from the pain like they'd touched something burning. She had not been touched by another living person in 1,094 days. Until me. I didn't mean to do it. I want to be very clear about that. I reached out in a crowd to catch my balance, grabbed the nearest hand, and changed both of our lives in under 4 seconds. This is the story of how that accident became the most important thing that ever happened to me. Let me go back. Because before any of this, I was living a life that was very specifically designed to keep me invisible. Not by anyone else's design. By mine. I had a small apartment on the eastern side of the Conclave district, a studio, technically, though I had arranged it so carefully that it almost felt like multiple rooms. My desk by the window, my reading chair in the corner, my kitchen organized by frequency of use. I liked systems. I liked things that made sense. My job was to maintain the Conclave's historical records, intake, cataloging, cross-referencing. Hours of quiet work in a room where the shelves were taller than most alphas, and the dust caught in the light like snow if you walked too fast. I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. And exactly no one cared. I was 24. I had graduated mid-rank from my secondary tier, which meant decent marks but no particular distinction, no internship placement at a prestigious firm, no mentor who recognized something exceptional in me. I had gotten the records job because I applied at exactly the right moment, and I had neat handwriting on my intake form. My designation was Omega, 6th tier, which in the Conclave's social architecture meant I was permitted to attend formal events, but not expected to contribute to them. I could enter the same rooms as upper-tier alphas. I was just not supposed to exist in those rooms in any way that might make them uncomfortable. I had been doing this successfully for 2 years. I attended events because my job occasionally required my physical presence. Inventory deliveries, archive handoffs, the kind of ceremonial tasks that needed a warm body, but not a particularly important one. I wore sensible clothes in muted colors. I stood near walls. I did not make eye contact with anyone above rank 4, unless they addressed me first. If you have ever felt invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to see you, if you have ever learned to make yourself smaller, not because you were afraid, but because it was simply easier than fighting for space you were not sure you deserved, then you already understand exactly where I was when all of this started. Stay with me, because what happens next changes everything about the story I just told you about myself. The Queen had been in power for 6 years. She had taken the throne at 22, which was young even by Conclave standards, and she had spent every single one of those 6 years making absolutely certain no one questioned whether she deserved it. The way people talked about her in the hallways, quietly, always quietly, was a mixture of reverence and fear that I found genuinely difficult to separate. They admired her. They were also slightly terrified of her. Her name was Vailindra. Most people did not use it. She was simply the Queen, or Her Excellency in formal settings, or, in the lowest whispers, the ones people saved for empty corridors, the Untouchable. The curse had begun 3 years before the day I grabbed her hand. I learned the details only much later, but the publicly known version was this. She had been hexed during a political summit by a rival faction's practitioner. A contact curse. Anyone who touched her bare skin experienced immediate, intense pain. Not a burn exactly, more like a pressure that hit all at once and then spread. It did not mark them permanently, but it left no doubt. She wore gloves everywhere, long ones in winter, shorter silk ones in summer. She had them in every color, made by 3 different craftswomen who received standing orders and never asked questions. She had not shaken a hand in 3 years. She had not been embraced. She had not been steadied when she stumbled. She had not had someone press a palm to her shoulder in comfort, or brush fingers against her wrist in greeting, or hold her hand because she needed to feel held. 1,094 days. I know the number because she told me. Eventually. She had counted every single one. The event where everything changed was called the seasonal convocation. It happened 4 times a year, and my attendance was required specifically because my office was responsible for delivering the updated archive seals to the record-keeping committee, which met on the same day. I had done this 3 times before without incident. I delivered the seals. I signed the transfer form. I found a spot near the back left wall of the main hall where I was least likely to be in anyone's way, and I waited for the formal session to end so I could leave. The main hall was large, cathedral ceilings, stone floors that had been polished to a reflective shine, long rows of seating for the senior council members. The Queen's chair was at the head of the room, slightly elevated, and I had a clear view of it from my wall position, which I had not asked for and did not particularly want. I saw her walk in, and I did what everyone did. I watched. She was tall. I had known this in an abstract fact file sort of way, 5 feet 10, according to the official record I had personally filed, but knowing a measurement and seeing someone move through a room are different things. She wore deep burgundy, structured and precise, and her gloves were the exact same shade. Her hair was dark, and pulled back with the kind of severity that looked intentional rather than rushed. Her face was the reason people went quiet when she entered rooms, not just because of her authority, because she was beautiful in a way that felt almost architectural, precise and intentional, and slightly unnerving if you looked too long. Still very much grieving the loss, I looked away. The session began, speeches were made. Resolutions were passed. I stood near my wall and mentally organized my afternoon. Then someone in the 3rd row stood up very suddenly. I learned afterward that it was a protest, a deliberate disruption by a faction that opposed a recent conclave ruling. At the moment it happened, all I knew was that a very large man stood up fast and knocked into the row in front of him, and suddenly there was movement everywhere at once. People standing, people stepping back, a brief sound that might have been shouting from the other side of the room. I was pressed forward. Someone behind me was trying to go around me, and someone to my left was backing up, and I grabbed the nearest thing I could find to stay upright. It was a wrist. Bare. Someone had their sleeve pushed back, or their glove had slipped, or... The thought finished itself 3 seconds too late. I grabbed the wrist, steadied myself, looked up. Queen Vailindra was looking at me. Her face was... I do not have a good word for it. It was not pain. That was the thing I noticed first, even before I processed who she was. There was no pain on her face. There was something much stranger. There was shock. If you are already feeling what I was feeling in that moment, that cold, dropping realization of what you have just done, then you understand why I need you to stay with me right now. Because what she does next is the part that I still think about, even now. Keep watching. I let go immediately. My hand came back to my side and I stood there while the noise of the disruption continued around us, and I could not make my face do anything useful. She was still looking at me. She was not looking at her wrist. She was not looking at the chaos. She was looking at my face with an expression I had never seen on the Queen of the Conclave, and have since learned belongs only to her. A very controlled, very specific stillness that means she is thinking faster than anyone in the room realizes. The disruption was contained within 90 seconds. The guards handled it. The session was called to a brief recess. People moved. Conversations started. The room reorganized itself around the interruption. The Queen lowered her sleeve. She turned away from me. I thought that was it. I thought, and this seems absurd now, that she had simply not registered what happened. that I was so successfully invisible that even the extraordinary event of touching her without hurting her had not made enough of an impression to warrant her continued attention. I was very wrong. Her attendant found me before I made it to the door. She was young, the attendant, maybe younger than me, with the careful posture of someone who had been trained to convey urgency without appearing urgent. She said, in a very quiet voice, "Her Excellency requests you remain." I said, very intelligently, "Me?" "Yes," she said. "You." The room had mostly cleared for the recess. I stood near the left wall, my wall, and waited. The attendant disappeared behind a side door and did not come back. What came back was the Queen. She had changed her gloves, fresh ones, identical to the ones she had been wearing. She walked toward me at a pace that was not hurried, but was also not gentle, and she stopped at a distance that was slightly closer than professionally standard. She looked at me for a long moment. "Name," she said. "Alara," I said. "Alara Voss. I work in the—" "I know where you work," she said. That silenced me completely. Because there was absolutely no reason, not one, for the Queen to know where a rank 6 Omega Records clerk worked. "You touched me," she said. "I'm sorry," I said. "I lost my balance. I did not mean to. I did not know you're— I'm sorry." "You're apologizing," she said, "for not being in pain." I did not have an answer for that. She studied me for another moment, then she said something I was not prepared for. "Did you feel anything?" I thought about the wrist I had grabbed, the warmth of it, the solid reality of it, the way it had felt like any other person's wrist, real and present and alive. "No," I said. "Nothing." Something moved through her face, quick and controlled and gone before I could name it. "All right," she said. She turned and walked away. I stood near my wall for another 4 minutes before I was certain my legs would carry me out of the building without incident. They summoned me the next morning. Not a request, a summons, a formal document delivered to my office address at 7:45 in the morning by a courier who looked like he had been chosen specifically for his ability to convey the seriousness of things without saying anything at all. I presented myself at the Queen's residential offices at 9 o'clock. I wore the best clothes I owned, which were business appropriate and not particularly impressive. I had spent 40 minutes deciding whether to wear my hair up or down, and had settled on up because it seemed more professional, then spent the walk over second-guessing myself. The Queen's personal advisor met me in the anteroom. His name was Callum, and he was approximately 60 years old and had the air of a man who had witnessed many extraordinary things and learned to treat them as administrative problems. He explained the situation with impressive efficiency. What had happened in the hall was not, as I had hoped, something that would simply be forgotten. It had been witnessed by at least 30 senior council members. The Queen had not cried out. I had not flinched. This combination was, in conclave tradition, what was called a contact sign, a visible demonstration that two people's designations and resonances were unusually aligned. It was, Callum explained, the kind of thing that people talked about. "We would like to manage the conversation," he said. "What does that mean?" I said. "It means," he said, "that Her Excellency will require your periodic presence over the coming weeks. Nothing demanding. Your regular work will continue. You will simply need to be available for certain appearances and events." "Appearances?" I said. "The alternative," he said, "is that the story circulates without any frame, and the frame that naturally forms is that Her Excellency has found her." He paused. "Her match. Uncontrolled, that narrative creates political vulnerability. I thought about this very carefully. So I am being asked," I said, "to spend time with the Queen, publicly, so that people see it and think it is a deliberate choice rather than an accident." "Essentially," Callum said. "Does she know you are describing it that way?" He looked at me for a moment with something that might, in a different face, have been amusement. "She is in the next room," he said. "She can hear everything." The door to my left opened. I am going to be honest, I almost left, not because of fear exactly, more because I was extremely certain, in that moment, that I was about to have an experience that would be entirely outside of any framework I had developed for managing my life. I was a systems person. I liked things that had clear parameters. The queen standing in a doorway with her arms crossed and her expression entirely composed was not a clear parameter. "Come in," she said. "If you are watching this and you have ever stood at a door you were not sure you should walk through, whether that was a room or a relationship or just a choice that felt larger than you were ready for, then you already know what I did next. Tell me in the comments, what door did you almost not walk through? I will be reading every one." I walked through the door. Her office was nothing like I had imagined. I had, in my 2 years of invisibility, built up various mental images of what spaces belonging to powerful people looked like. Cold, probably. Minimal. Designed to impress rather than inhabit. Her office was lived in. Books stacked in systems that made sense only to her. A reading chair near the window that had been used enough to show it. The cushion slightly compressed on one side. A small table beside it with a ring stain from a cup that had been set there hundreds of times. Maps on the walls, annotated in a handwriting so small I could not read it from where I stood. The desk was enormous but covered with organized chaos, not disorder, not neglect, but the evidence of a person who actually worked. She sat behind the desk, gestured to the chair across from it. I sat. "I want to be direct with you," she said. "Please," I said. "What happened yesterday was—" She stopped, seemed to decide on a different word. "Unprecedented. For me personally. For the conclave politically. I understand. The arrangement Callum described is accurate. I am asking you to be present at several events over the next 4 to 6 weeks. You will be introduced as someone I have chosen to spend time with. The council will interpret this as a deliberate response to the contact sign, which makes me appear in control of the situation." She paused. "You will be compensated for the time. Your position in the records office will not be affected. At the end of the 6 weeks, we will reassess." I looked at her. I thought about all the sensible things I could say. The careful, measured, practical response of a rank 6 Omega who had spent 2 years perfecting the art of not making waves. "Why me?" I said. She looked at me. "Because you are the only person who can touch me without screaming," she said. And I need the council to think I chose that. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in possibly 2 years. "All right," I said. The first week was uncomfortable, in the specific, low-grade way that 2 people who do not know each other experience when they are required to be in the same space. We attended 2 events together, a quarterly conclave luncheon where I was introduced briefly to 6 senior council members and spent most of the meal trying not to stare at the Queen while she navigated 4 simultaneous political conversations with the kind of fluency that made it look effortless. And a smaller gathering, more social, less formal, where I stood beside her for approximately 2 hours and we exchanged perhaps 40 words between us. What I noticed, in those first few days, was the gloves. She wore them constantly. But I started to see the small adjustments. The way she angled her hands when accepting a document so the paper landed on gloved fingers rather than skin. The particular care with which she positioned herself in groups so that reaching distance was always managed. The way she held cups by the handle only, never wrapping her hand around the warmth. She had built an entire physical vocabulary around not being touched. Watching it was unexpectedly sad. On the 4th day, I was working late in the records room and she came in. This had never happened before. The Queen did not visit the records room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the shelves, and then she said, "I need the original charter from the 3rd Conclave Assembly. Callum says it was moved to Sub-Archive 3. "It was," I said. "I moved it. The humidity was better." She looked at me. "I can get it," I said. I stood, got the document, brought it to the table near her, not handing it directly, setting it down, because I had already learned to read the choreography of how she received things. She sat at the table and began reading. She read for 40 minutes. I went back to my cataloging. At some point I made tea. There was a small electric kettle in the room that I used constantly, and I set a cup near her without saying anything. She looked at it. Then she picked it up and drank it, which I counted as a victory of some kind. When she left, she said, at the door, "Thank you, for the charter and the tea." "Of course," I said. She was almost gone when I said, without really planning to, "How do you take your tea for next time?" She turned back. Something in her face did something subtle that I could not fully read yet. "Strong," she said. "No sugar." She left. I stood in my records room and thought, I am going to be in serious trouble. I know some of you already see exactly where this is going, and I know some of you are thinking, wait, but what about the curse? What is actually behind it? Stay with me, because the answer to that question is the part that breaks the whole story open. The second week was different. I am not sure who changed first, whether she relaxed because I kept being reliably non-threatening, or whether I got more comfortable because she kept being surprisingly not terrifying once you got past the first layer. She started coming to the records room in the evenings, not every evening, but enough that I began to recognize the pattern, the particular sound of her footsteps in the outer corridor, the way she paused in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds before entering, always with some stated purpose that I understood was partially real and partially an excuse. We talked. Carefully at first, then less carefully. She asked about my cataloging system one evening, genuinely curious, not performative, and I explained it for 20 minutes while she sat across from me with her gloved hands folded on the table and the expression of someone who finds order inherently satisfying. I caught her reorganizing a small stack of documents I had set aside, not in the way I had them, but in a way that was, objectively, also logical. I said, "You have a system too." She said, "Everyone has a system." I said, "Not everyone has two." She looked at the documents, then at me. My first advisor organized everything by date. I was 12. I learned it from watching him, but I prefer topic clusters with date subsorts. Same, I said. Something about her face changed. I realized, slowly, that she had not talked about something as inconsequential as filing systems with another person in a very long time. Maybe years. That everything she said to everyone around her was freighted with politics, with consequence, with the weight of her position. "You are easier to talk to than I expected," she said. "I hear that a lot," I said. "From people who expected me to be a piece of furniture." She was quiet for a moment. "That is not what I meant," she said. "I know," I said. I was not offended. She looked at me with the same calculating but not cold expression that was becoming familiar. Then she said, very quietly, "I do not talk to people much anymore. Outside of," she made a small gesture, "necessity. Because of the curse?" She did not answer immediately. "Partly," she said, "and partly because when you cannot be touched, people start treating you like you cannot be approached." There it was, under the authority, and the precision, and the gloves. The thing she had been carrying for 3 years. She had been alone, not politically isolated, not professionally limited, just alone, in the most specific and human way. I said, "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she said, and then, like she had not meant to say it, "It really is." I told her about my cataloging system for the restricted documents in the 4th week. I told her about the apprenticeship I had wanted when I was 17, archival conservation at the National Library, which had a waitlist so long I had not even applied. I told her about my habit of making tea at precisely the same times every day, which she had already noticed and confirmed with a level of detail that told me she had been paying more attention than she let on. She told me that she had wanted to be a cartographer. The word landed quietly in the space between us. "A cartographer," I said. "I liked maps," she said. The way they turn the world into something that can be understood. Something with edges. A pause. I was 8. My mother told me it was a lovely hobby for a future leader to have. She did not mean it as a compliment, I said. No, she said. I looked at the maps on her office walls. The handwriting I had never been close enough to read, and I thought, she put them there herself, and she annotated them herself, and every time she sat in that office, she was surrounded by a version of the thing she had once wanted and was not allowed to become. The curse, I said carefully. What really happened? She looked at me for a long moment. I thought she would not answer. Then, her name was Dacienne. She was Alpha, upper rank, one of the conclave's senior representatives from the Eastern District. We were involved. For about a year. I did not say anything. Let her continue. It ended. My choice. She did not agree that it should. She looked at her gloved hands. The curse was registered 3 weeks later as an unsanctioned contact hex, illegal under conclave law. She was censured. The curse, unfortunately, does not care about censure. Why has it not been lifted? Because lifting it requires the cooperation of the practitioner who cast it, she said, and Dacienne has declined every formal request. Can the conclave compel her? Politically, no. Not without creating a conflict I am not willing to start. She looked up. It was a choice she made to punish me for rejecting her. I have decided not to give her a war as well. The control in her voice was extraordinary, and underneath it, I could hear the thing she was not saying, how much it cost her to make that choice every single day. That is not okay, I said. What she did to you. No, she said. It is not. And you have just been living with it. Yes. Alone. Ilara, she said, and the sound of my name in her mouth, careful and precise, did something I was not prepared for. Yes. Alone. I reached across the table. Not impulsively, I thought about it for a full second, a conscious second, and I put my hand over hers. The gloves were there. I was not touching her skin, but she went very still. You are not alone right now, I said. She looked at my hand on hers. She did not pull away. If you are still watching, I need you to drop a comment right now. Do you think she was already falling in love at this point, or was it still just survival? Because the answer she gave me, when she finally told me, is not what I expected. Stay with me. The threat came in the 5th week. Callum told me about it in the morning, with the same administrative efficiency he brought to everything, which made the content of what he was saying briefly difficult to absorb. A coalition of 3 council members, all of them representing factions that had historically opposed the Queen's appointments, had filed a formal challenge to her authority. Their argument centered on the contact sign. Specifically, they argued that because the contact sign had been accidental rather than intentional, it was legally meaningless, and that the Queen's public association with me had been a staged manipulation of tradition to obscure her political vulnerability. They want to use me to weaken her, I said. They want to use the ambiguity of the situation, Callum said. You specifically are relevant because they are also claiming, he paused. They are claiming you were planted, a deliberate actor working on the Queen's behalf, which would make the entire event a deception. I stared at him. They are saying I deliberately grabbed her hand during the disruption, I said. Yes. They are saying it was planned. Yes. I grabbed the nearest wrist I could reach because I was falling over. I believe you, Callum said. The evidence would also support that reading. However, the challenge has been formally lodged, which means there will be a council hearing, and at that hearing, both you and Her Excellency will be asked to testify. I thought about her, in her office with the annotated maps, with her gloves and her tea, strong and no sugar, with her voice saying my name in that careful, precise way that had started to feel like something I looked forward to. What happens to her if the challenge succeeds? I said. Callum looked at me steadily. It would be a significant political blow, Not fatal to her position, but it would embolden other opposition and create difficulty. And what happens to me? You would be removed from any association with the Queen's office, he said, and investigated. Formally. I sat with this for a moment. Then I said, I need to talk to her. She was already in the records room when I arrived that evening, which told me she knew. She was sitting in the reading chair near the window, not at the table where we usually worked, and she had her hands in her lap, and she was looking at the annotated map on the far wall. She looked tired. You know, I said. Callum sent me the brief, she said. I sat in the chair across from her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I want to hear you say it, I said. That you did not plan it. She looked at me. Ilara, she said. I know, I said. I know you did not. But I want to hear you say it. I did not plan it, she said. I did not know who you were when it happened. I barely processed what had happened before you let go. She held my gaze. That moment was the first time in 3 years that I did not anticipate a scream. It was completely unexpected, in the way that very few things still are, for me. I nodded. The coalition, I said. What do they actually want? To destabilize me, she said. They have been looking for an angle for 2 years. This is convenient for them. And if the hearing goes badly? It will not. But if it does? She was quiet for a moment. Then I manage it. I have managed worse. And me? She looked at me. Something in her expression shifted, past the political calculation, past the Queen's face, into something I was only beginning to learn. I will not let that happen to you, she said. She said it quietly and without any political framing. No reference to strategic necessity. No mention of managing narratives. Just, I will not let that happen to you. I was starting to understand that I was in trouble in a way I had not fully calculated when I walked through her door that first morning. I went home, and I lay in my bed, looking at the ceiling, and I thought about it very honestly for a long time. I was not a political actor. I was a records clerk. I had a small apartment, and a cataloging system I liked, and tea at specific times, and a life that had been, if not exciting, then at least stable. I could leave. Callum had not said this, but it was logically available to me. I could go to the council hearing, give an honest account of what happened, and formally withdraw from any association with the Queen's office. End the 6-week arrangement. Remove myself from the situation before the investigation made my life significantly more complicated than I had planned for. She had not asked me to stay. She would not. I was certain of that. She would not ask me to take on political risk for her sake because she did not operate that way. She managed her own costs. She had been doing it for years. So the next morning I went back to her office, and I told her the truth. I can end this, I said. The arrangement. I could go to the council, testify that the contact was accidental and clearly my error and entirely removed from any strategic intent, and voluntarily sever our association. It would take away the coalition's leverage. She looked at me. It might help your position, I said. If I remove myself, they lose the angle they are using. She was quiet for a very long moment. And you, she said. What happens to you? I go back to my life, I said. The records room, the cataloging. I tried to keep my voice even. I was nobody before this. I can be nobody again. Something crossed her face. Not the controlled stillness, not the political calculation, something rawer than either of those. I do not want that, she said. I said, carefully, you do not want the political problem. Ilara, her voice was different, not the Queen's voice, just her voice. I do not want you to disappear. That is what I am telling you. I looked at her. I am aware, she said, slower now, that this is not an appropriate thing for me to say. I am aware that the situation has exceeded its original parameters. I am aware that asking you to stay is asking you to take on a risk that you did not agree to when this started. She took a breath. I am also aware, she said, That the past 5 weeks have been a pause that lasted longer than her usual pauses. The most human I have felt in 3 years, and I am not willing to pretend that is not true, just because it is inconvenient. The room was very quiet. The most human, I said. Yes, she said. I thought about the chair by the window with the ring stain on the table, the maps with the small handwriting, strong tea, no sugar, the way she went still when I put my hand over hers. I am not going anywhere, I said. I need you to stay with me right now. Because what she tells me after this, what she finally admits when there are no political calculations left and no careful distances to maintain, is the moment that everything before it was building toward. Keep watching. The council hearing was 2 days later. We both testified. I gave my account. Accurate, unembellished, factual. I had reached for the nearest support in a moment of instability. I had not known whose wrist I was grabbing. The contact had lasted approximately 4 seconds. I had let go as soon as I regained my balance. The Queen gave hers. Equally factual, equally unembellished. She confirmed the unexpectedness of the event. She confirmed that my presence in her office during the subsequent weeks had been her choice, initiated for political reasons that she outlined clearly and without apology. The coalition's case did not survive contact with an honest account. Not because the conclave was particularly interested in justice, but because the most compelling version of events, the planted actor, the staged contact sign, required a level of coordination between a senior alpha and a rank 6 records clerk that was, on examination, not credible. The challenge was formally dismissed at 4 in the afternoon. Callum told me outside the chamber. He allowed himself a small expression of satisfaction before returning to his default setting of composed efficiency. I went back to the records room. She came in at 8 o'clock. I had the lights low. I worked better in lower light when I was tired, and she stood in the doorway for her 2 seconds, and then she came in, and she sat across from me at the table, and she looked at me for a long time without saying anything. "We won," I said. "Yes," she said. "You look like you are about to say something difficult." "I am," she said. I waited. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what I said 2 days ago. The most human you have felt in 3 years." "Yes." She looked at her gloved hands, then back at me. "I want to be honest with you about what that means, and what it does not mean, and why I am—" She stopped. "Why I am afraid." "You can be honest," I said. "Dacienne," she said. What she did. It was not just the curse. Before the curse, I had given her something real. I had let someone pass the— She made a small gesture toward herself. Past all of this. And what she did with it was this. She held up one gloved hand. She found the most precise possible way to make sure I could never forget that letting someone in is dangerous. "I know," I said. "I do not know how to do this," she said. "I do not know how to be, whatever this is becoming, with you, without also being aware of all the ways it could end terribly." "Neither do I," said. She looked at me. "But I think," I said, "that the difference between you and me is that I am not afraid of trying. I was afraid of being invisible. That is what I was actually afraid of. And you see me, whatever else this is or is not." I stopped. "You see me." She was quiet. "You were never invisible to me," she said. I looked at her. "I knew who you were before the ceremony," she said. "You filed 3 consecutive reports last year that reorganized how the sub-archive cross-references legal documents. My office uses them every week." I asked Callum who had done it, and he told me your name. She paused. "I noticed you before you ever noticed me." I did not say anything for a moment. "I thought I did not exist in rooms you were in," I said. "I know," she said. "I was careful." A pause. "I did not know what to do with noticing you. So I did nothing. And then you grabbed my hand and—" She stopped. "And I am still not sure what to do with it, but I know I do not want to do nothing." After that, things changed. Slowly, then not slowly at all. She started coming to the records room not for documents. She came because it was where I was. We sat on opposite sides of the table, or sometimes on the same side. She migrated gradually toward the chair next to mine, over a period of about 2 weeks, and I said nothing because saying something would have made it stop. We talked about the maps. She explained each annotation. Every one was a note about a place she wanted to understand better, a political boundary she was watching, a route she had traced mentally at 3 in the morning when she could not sleep. "You mapped the whole Eastern District," I said one evening. "4 times," she said. "The borders changed." "And the Western Coast?" "Once. A long time ago, I was trying to figure out if there was a route the old cartographers had missed." "Was there?" She looked at me, and something in her face that had been closed for a very long time was open. "I think so," she said. "I have never gone to check." "We could go," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "We could." She let me touch her gloved hands freely now, not just when I reached across deliberately. She would rest her hand near mine, available if I chose to reach for it. Small shifts, the language of a person who had forgotten that closeness, could be chosen rather than endured. One evening she came in with 2 cups of tea. She had made them, both of them, and she set mine near my documents. Strong, 2 sugars, the way she had learned I liked it. Without saying a word, I looked up and she was already looking back. "Thank you," I said. "Strong," she said. 2 sugars. "Yes," I said. She sat down, and we drank our tea, and neither of us said anything, and it was the most comfortable I had ever been in my life. The moment it became public, really public, not managed appearance public, was at the spring convocation 2 months later. By then the council had largely adjusted its understanding of the situation. The contact sign was accepted as genuine. The Queen's political position was stronger than it had been before the challenge, which had the specific irony of meaning that the coalition's attack had accidentally solidified the very thing they had tried to undermine. She was at the head of the hall in her usual position. I was no longer near the wall. Callum had placed me 3 rows from the front, which was not where a rank 6 Omega records clerk belonged, and I had said so, and he had said, with his small administrative smile, that Her Excellency had specified the placement. The session concluded. The hall began to empty in the usual reshuffling of people toward conversation clusters and toward the exits. She crossed the room toward me, not toward the senior council member who intercepted her path. She acknowledged him briefly, kept walking. Not toward the faction representative who had a question about a pending resolution. She delegated to Callum with a look and kept walking. She came to me. She stopped directly in front of me. The room was still half full. Everyone who was paying attention, and many people were, could see exactly what was happening. She took off her glove, her right glove. She folded it once and held it in her left hand, and then she reached out with her bare hand and she took mine. The room went very quiet. I looked at our hands, her skin against mine, real and present and alive. She said quietly enough that only I could hear, "I want to try." I said, "You already are." "No," she said. "I mean, I want to try with the understanding that I am not just managing a situation anymore. I am choosing you, deliberately, with full awareness." She held my gaze. "That is different from what we started with." "Yes," I said. "It is. And I need you to know," she said, "that it terrifies me." "I know," I said. "Good," she said, and something that was not quite a smile moved across her face but was headed in that direction. I would hate to be the only one. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back. Every person in that room who had watched the untouchable Queen navigate 3 years of careful distances and choreographed untouchability watched her stand in the middle of the convocation hall, holding the hand of a rank 6 records clerk and not letting go. 3 months later, Dacian agreed to lift the curse. I do not know exactly what changed her mind. I know that the Queen had not pursued her, not escalated, not made her life politically difficult. I know that the queen's position had strengthened considerably over the quarter, which might have made the hex feel less like a win and more like an inconvenience she was carrying for no purpose. I know that Callum delivered the news to us in the records room, which had become, without formal announcement, the place where we spent most of our evenings. I was cataloging. She was in the chair next to mine, reading a report she had brought with her, which she did frequently now. He told us. She nodded once. Set her report down. After he left, we sat quietly for a moment. "How do you feel?" I said. She thought about it, genuinely considered the question rather than answering reflexively. "Strange," she said. "I have been managing it for so long that I am not sure what it will feel like to stop managing it." "We do not have to rush," I said. She looked at me, then she reached over and took my hand, bare, both of us, no gloves, and held it. "I know," she said. The lifting happened at a formal ceremony a week later, attended by the senior council and a practitioner sanctioned by the conclave. It took 11 minutes. I stood slightly behind and to the left of the queen's position, which was where I had learned I fit best in formal settings when I was there as myself, rather than as a strategic necessity. When it was done, she turned around and found me immediately. She pulled off both gloves. She held both hands out, palms up. I put my hands in hers. And she smiled. A real one, not the controlled near smile I had been cataloging for months, and it rearranged her face entirely, and I thought, there she is. There is the person who wanted to be a cartographer at age 8 and annotates maps at 3 in the morning and makes tea exactly right and was lonely for so long that warmth became something she forgot existed. There she is. A year after the spring convocation, I was still in the records room. Promoted, technically. Senior archivist, with a small budget increase and the right to formally recommend cataloging overhauls, which I had already been doing informally for 2 years. The promotion had been approved by Callum and signed by the Queen, who had said, when I mentioned that she probably should not be approving my personnel file, I recused myself from the performance review. The approval was someone else's. I simply did not argue. She was still Queen. Stronger than she had been before, in ways that the coalition had not anticipated and found, I think, somewhat annoying. She was also, and this was the part that still surprised people who remembered the 3 years of careful gloves and careful distances, someone who could be seen, occasionally, reaching for my hand. In meetings, sometimes. In the convocation hall, once, memorably, in the middle of a formal dinner where a visiting delegation was making a speech, and she leaned slightly sideways and found my hand under the table, and simply held it, and when I looked at her, she was watching the speaker with her composed, political face, and I thought, this is what she meant when she said she wanted to try. She had been a map maker who was not allowed to make maps, and a person who could not be touched, and a queen who had forgotten that warmth existed. She was still all of those things, in the way that history stays with you. But she had also found new routes she had not mapped yet. We were planning to go to the western coast in the spring. She wanted to check if the old cartographers had missed a route. I told her that whatever we found, I wanted to document it properly. She said, "Of course, you are the archivist." I said, "I am also the person who accidentally held your hand." She said quietly, "You are the person who did not let go." Sometimes I think about that moment in the convocation hall. The noise, the pressure, the hand I reached for without thinking. 4 seconds. I think about what would have happened if I had regained my balance on my own. If I had steadied myself against the wall instead. If I had gone left instead of right. I would have filed my archive seals and gone home and made tea at exactly the right time and spent another year being very good at my job in a room where no one knew my name. And she would have kept counting. I do not like to think about that for too long. What I know is this. The thing I was afraid of was being invisible, existing in spaces without mattering to anyone in them. And the thing she was afraid of was being exactly where I wanted to be, so close to another person that losing them would leave a mark. We were afraid of opposite things, and somehow, accidentally, we became the answer to each other's fear. I would do it again. Every single part of it. The stumble, the summons, the records room evenings, the council hearing, the spring convocation, the bare hands, and the real smile and the maps I have learned to read. I would reach for that wrist in the crowd every time. What started as an accident, I choose every day. So that is the story. Almost all of it. Except, and I need you to hear this part, there are things I still do not know. I do not know what Dacienne saw, in that last year, that made her finally let the curse go. I have my theory. The Queen has hers. We have never asked Dacienne directly, and I suspect we never will. I do not know what the Council truly believes, whether they accept the contact sign as genuine, or whether they have simply decided that the outcome is stable enough to leave alone. I have stopped caring, a little, but sometimes I watch Callum's expression when he thinks no one is looking, and I think there is something he knows about those 3 years that he has never told us. I do not know what the Western Coast will show us in the spring, and there is one more thing. Something the Queen told me last week, quietly, in the records room, with both our hands on the table between us. She told me that the practitioner who lifted the curse had said something unusual during the ceremony, something that was not in the official report. Something about the nature of the contact sign, what it actually means, biologically in the old tradition. She started to explain it, and then Callum knocked on the door, and I never heard the rest of it. I asked her about it the next morning. She said, "I will tell you. When I have figured out how to say it. I am still waiting. If you have been with me this whole story, if you made it all the way here, then I need you to tell me in the comments, what do you think the practitioner said? What does the contact sign really mean in the old tradition? Because I have my guess. And if I am right, everything we have been through so far was only the beginning. Drop your theory below. Like this video if you want to hear what she finally tells me. Subscribe, because that conversation, the one that changes everything I thought I understood about all of this, that is the next one. I will see you there.